At 11:47 p.m. on my forgotten birthday, I signed the papers that would make a complete stranger a millionaire and leave my own children with nothing but the shock of their lives. They'd spent 5 years treating me like I was already dead, checking their phones during family dinners and calculating their inheritance while I sat invisible in my own home. But dead women can't rewrite their wills, and tomorrow morning, when they came crawling back with their fake apologies and panic-bought flowers, they'd discover that some ghosts know exactly how to haunt the living. I stood in my kitchen at 11:47 p.m. on March 15th, staring at my untouched birthday cake while signing the most important document of my life, a will that would give my entire fortune to Sarah Chen, a complete stranger I'd met just 3 hours earlier. The house felt different that night. Quieter, not the peaceful quiet I'd grown accustomed to since David passed, but the hollow kind of silence that comes when you finally stop waiting for something that's never going to happen. The birthday cake sat on my granite countertop like a monument to my own foolishness. Vanilla with buttercream frosting, the kind I'd made for my children's birthdays for decades. Except this time, I'd bought it for myself. 72 candles still in the package. Because what's the point of lighting candles when there's no one there to sing? My hands trembled slightly as I signed my name across the bottom of the legal document, Elena Marie Hartwell. Each letter felt like a small act of rebellion against the woman I'd been for so long, the woman who always put everyone else first, who made excuses for her children's behavior, who convinced herself that being forgotten was somehow her fault. The pen felt heavier than it should have. This wasn't just ink on paper. This was me finally answering a question I'd been avoiding for 5 years. What do you do when the people you love most treat you like you're already dead? I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd hosted countless family dinners, where I'd listened to Marcus complain about his job while I wrote him another check, where Claire had cried over her divorce while I promised to help with her mortgage payments, the same kitchen where I'd waited all day for a phone call that never came, checking my cell phone every few minutes like some lovesick teenager. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't the victim of their neglect. Tonight, I was the author of my own story. The legal papers were spread across my kitchen table like a battle plan. My attorney had warned me this was drastic, that maybe I should sleep on it, that families sometimes needed time to change. But I'd already given them 5 years, 5 birthdays, 5 chances to remember that I existed for reasons beyond my bank account. I set the pen down and looked at the cake one more time. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, my children would learn that love isn't inheritance, and that forgetting someone has consequences they never saw coming. But tonight, I was going to eat my own birthday cake and savor every single bite. You have to understand, I wasn't always the forgotten woman sitting alone in her kitchen. For 43 years, I was the center of everything. David and I built our life around family traditions, around making sure everyone felt loved and remembered. Our Victorian home on Maple Street was the gathering place, the heart of our family's universe. When David was alive, March 15th was practically a holiday in our house. He'd wake me up with coffee and my favorite blueberry muffins, always singing that terrible off-key version of Happy Birthday that made me laugh until my sides hurt. The kids would pile into our bed with handmade cards, their faces bright with excitement. Even as adults, Marcus and Claire would drive over for my birthday dinner, bringing flowers and stories and the kind of chaotic joy that comes with a house full of people who actually want to be there. But then, David had his heart attack 8 years ago, and everything shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't just Elena anymore. I was the widow who needed taking care of, the mother who had too much house and too much money and too much time on her hands. Except, nobody wanted to take care of me. They just wanted me to take care of them, like I always had. But now, without the buffer of David's presence to make it feel mutual. Marcus was drowning in law school debt, so I paid it off, $68,000, gone from my savings account with a single wire transfer. "Just until I get established, Mom," he promised. "I'll pay you back." That was 6 years ago. Then came his wedding. $30,000 for the reception, because Jessica had dreamed of a fairy tale wedding since she was little. How could I say no to love? Claire's divorce was messier. Legal fees, a custody battle. And then her ex-husband stopped paying child support. So I stepped in. Again, I covered Tommy's medical bills when he broke his leg skateboarding. I bought school clothes for both kids every fall. I paid for Lily's violin lessons and Tommy's soccer equipment. When Claire's car died, I handed her the keys to my barely used Honda, because Grandma doesn't drive that much anyway. I became the family's safety net, the solution to every financial crisis and emergency. Need a babysitter? Call Mom. Need money for a down payment? Call Mom. Need someone to host Christmas dinner, cook Thanksgiving turkey, organize birthday parties for the grandkids? Call Mom. I was useful. I was needed. I thought that was the same thing as being loved. Every Sunday, I'd prepare dinner for 7 people. I'd spend hours in the kitchen, setting the table with my good china, making sure everyone's favorite dishes were represented. Marcus liked his steaks, rare. Claire was going through a vegetarian phase. Jessica was always on some new diet. I accommodated everyone, adjusted every menu, made sure no one felt left out or inconvenienced. But somewhere along the way, between the check writing and the dinner hosting and the problem solving, I stopped being Elena and became just Mom. Not a person with feelings and needs and birthdays worth remembering, but a resource to be accessed when convenient. I should have seen it coming when David's funeral felt more like a business meeting than a goodbye. March 15th started like any other day, except my heart was beating a little faster. I know it sounds pathetic. A 72-year-old woman getting excited about her birthday, like a child. But I couldn't help myself. I'd been dropping hints for weeks. "Oh, March 15th is coming up," I'd mention during our Sunday dinners. "Getting closer to the big day," I'd say, when Claire called asking for money for Tommy's field trip. I woke up at 6:30, earlier than usual. The house felt expectant, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something wonderful to happen. I made my coffee and sat by the kitchen window, watching the morning light filter through the maple trees David had planted when we first moved in. My phone was right beside me on the table, waiting. By 9 o'clock, I'd checked my phone 12 times. Maybe they were planning something special. Maybe they wanted to surprise me. I cleaned the house, just in case they decided to come over. I even stopped by the grocery store and picked up ingredients for Marcus's favorite lasagna, telling myself it was just good planning. 10 o'clock came and went, then 11. At noon, I finally broke down and called Marcus's office. His secretary, Patricia, answered with her usual cheerful voice. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Hartwell. Marcus is in depositions all day, but I can take a message." "Just tell him his mother called," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. I didn't want to say it was my birthday. That felt too much like begging. By 2 o'clock, the silence was becoming unbearable. I decided to drive to Claire's house, telling myself I was just checking in, being a good grandmother. When I pulled into her driveway, I could hear music and laughter coming from the backyard. The gate was open, and I could see colorful balloons tied to the fence posts. I walked around to the back and found Claire arranging party favors on a picnic table. At least 15 kids were running around the yard, and several other parents were helping set up games. Tommy was wearing a birthday boy hat, grinning from ear to ear. "Mom!" Claire looked genuinely startled to see me, like I was an unexpected guest at my own family's gathering. "What are you doing here?" "I was just in the neighborhood," I lied, watching her face carefully. "This looks like quite a party." "It's Jimmy Patterson's birthday," she explained, referring to Tommy's best friend. "His mom had to work, so I offered to host it here. You know how much I love throwing parties." I stood there for a moment, watching her fuss with the decorations, waiting for recognition to dawn in her eyes. It didn't come. Finally, quietly, I said, "It's my birthday too." The color drained from Claire's face. She froze, a package of paper plates in her hands, and I watched her mental calendar flip frantically. "Oh my God, Mom. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's just that Jimmy's party has been planned for weeks, and Tommy was so excited, and I've been so busy with work and the kids, and—" "It's fine," I interrupted, but it wasn't fine. It was the furthest thing from fine. "No, it's not fine." She was getting defensive now, her voice rising. "But you have to understand how crazy my life is. I'm a single mother working full-time, and you never said you wanted to celebrate. You always say, 'Don't make a fuss' when we ask about your birthday." I stood there, listening to her make excuses, watching Jimmy Patterson blow out candles on a store-bought cake, while a dozen parents sang happy birthday with genuine enthusiasm. And that's when it hit me like a physical blow. This was the 5th year, 5 consecutive birthdays, where I'd become invisible to my own children. The first year after David died, I'd made excuses for them. "They're grieving too," I told myself. The second year, "They're just busy getting back to normal." But now, standing in my daughter's backyard, watching her celebrate a stranger's child while forgetting her own mother, I finally understood the truth. I wasn't forgotten. I was simply not worth remembering. I drove home in complete silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. The radio was off, the windows rolled up, and the only sound was my own shallow breathing and the rhythmic thump of my heart echoing in my ears. It felt like I was underwater, moving through a world that had suddenly become foreign and hostile. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for 10 minutes, staring at the house David and I had called home for 37 years. The white picket fence he'd painted every spring. The rose bushes I'd tended through 40 seasons. The front porch where we'd watched our children take their first steps, ride their first bikes, leave for their first dates. Everything looked exactly the same, but somehow completely different, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. Inside, the silence was deafening. I walked through the living room, past family photos that now felt like evidence of a life that had been slowly erased. There was Marcus at his law school graduation, his arm around my shoulders as I beamed with pride. Claire's wedding picture, where I'd spent 3 days helping her get ready. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, family vacations, all carefully preserved in silver frames that nobody ever looked at anymore. I found myself standing in front of the mantelpiece, staring at our last family photo from 2 years ago. We'd hired a professional photographer for what Claire had called a multi-generational portrait. Everyone was smiling, but I could see it now. The way Marcus was checking his phone, even as the camera clicked. how Claire's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, how Jessica was already looking toward the door. Even in our family photo, I was the only one who was actually present. I walked to David's old chair, the brown leather recliner he'd claimed as his own 20 years ago. I'd kept it exactly as he'd left it, his mystery novel still bookmarked on the side table, his reading glasses folded neatly on the arm. I sank into the chair and felt smaller than I had in years. "They forgot me, David," I said out loud, my voice cracking on his name. 5 years? How does someone forget their mother's birthday? 5 years in a row. The house didn't answer, but I could almost hear his voice, the way he used to warn me when the kids were teenagers. "Ellie, love, you can't pour from an empty cup. You're giving them so much, they don't even know how to appreciate it anymore." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my missed calls for the day. 3 telemarketers, one from my dentist's office confirming next week's appointment, and one from Robert, my older brother, who lived across town. I opened his voicemail with shaking fingers. "Hey, Ellie, just calling to wish my baby sister a happy birthday. I know today's probably hard without David, but I hope you're doing something nice for yourself. Love you, kiddo." I started crying then, really crying, for the first time since David's funeral. Not the polite tears of disappointment, but the gut-wrenching sobs of someone who'd finally realized she'd been living as a ghost in her own life. My brother, who I saw maybe 4 times a year, had remembered me. My children, who I'd sacrificed everything for, had not. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I just sat in David's chair until midnight, planning my resurrection. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The crying was done. The self-pity had run its course overnight, leaving behind something harder and more focused. I made my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop with the determination of a woman who'd finally decided to take inventory of her own life. I started with my bank statements, something I'd been handling automatically for so long. I'd stopped really looking at the numbers. What I found shocked me. Between David's life insurance, his pension, our investments, and the steady appreciation of our property, I was worth far more than I'd realized. The house alone was valued at over $800,000 now. My investment portfolio had grown to nearly $400,000. My savings account, even after all the money I'd given away, still held over $200,000. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. I was a millionaire who'd been treating herself like a charity case, apologizing for taking up space in her own life while writing checks to ungrateful children who saw her as nothing more than an ATM with holiday cooking skills. Then I remembered the safe. David had installed it in our bedroom closet 15 years ago, behind a panel that looked like part of the wall. "For important papers," he'd said. "The stuff that matters." I hadn't opened it since his funeral, when I'd needed his birth certificate and military records, but now something was pulling me toward it. I found the key in David's old jewelry box, right where he'd always kept it. My hands were steadier now as I opened the heavy door and pulled out the file folders we'd organized together so many years ago. Wills, deeds, insurance policies, birth certificates. All the paperwork of a life well lived and carefully planned. But there, at the bottom of the stack, was something I'd forgotten about. A sealed envelope with my name, written in David's careful handwriting. "For Elena, to be opened when you need to remember who you are." Inside were 3 things that would change everything. The first was a letter, dated just 2 months before David's heart attack. His handwriting was shakier than usual, and I realized he must have written it during one of his episodes when his heart was acting up. My dearest Ellie, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And knowing you, you're probably giving everything away to people who don't appreciate what they have. You always were too generous for your own good. But I need you to know something. You don't owe anyone your happiness, not even our children. The letter went on for 2 pages, detailing his concerns about Marcus's sense of entitlement and Claire's habit of taking advantage of my generosity. They love you, he wrote, but they love your wallet more, and until they lose access to one, they'll never truly value the other. The second item was a copy of my current will, the one that split everything evenly between Marcus and Claire. But David had attached a note. Remember, wills can be changed. Until you're gone, everything belongs to you. The third item made my breath catch. It was a business card from Margaret Whitfield, estate planning attorney, with a handwritten note on the back. Elena, your husband was wise to be concerned. Call me when you're ready to take control. MW double quote. I stared at the card, remembering now. David had consulted with her about updating our wills 2 years before he died. She was the one who'd explained how easily children could manipulate elderly parents, how many seniors ended up impoverished because they gave everything away before recognizing they were being used. I walked back to my computer and looked at my bank statements again, but this time I wasn't seeing numbers. I was seeing power. I was seeing choices. I was seeing the ability to finally answer the question that had been haunting me. What happens when the people who should love you unconditionally prove that their love has very clear conditions? I picked up the phone and dialed Margaret Whitfield's number. After 5 years of being forgotten, it was time to make myself unforgettable. Margaret Whitfield's office smelled like leather and authority. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 55, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every family drama imaginable. When I showed her David's letter and explained my situation, she didn't look surprised. She looked tired. Mrs. Hartwell, you're the 3rd client this month with the exact same story, she said, leaning back in her chair. Adult children who've stopped seeing their parents as people and started seeing them as inheritance policies with legs. She explained my options with the clinical precision of someone who'd had this conversation too many times. I could change my will immediately, but that might seem reactionary. Or I could test them first, give them one final chance to prove that their love wasn't conditional on my death and their financial gain. The test approach often provides clarity, Margaret said, and if they fail, you'll know your decision was right. If they pass, you can always change your mind. I chose the test. My plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would call both Marcus and Claire with a carefully crafted message designed to trigger their deepest fears about losing their inheritance. I would be vague enough to create panic, but specific enough to make them think I was either dying or reconsidering my will. That evening, I called Marcus first. Honey, I need to talk to you and Claire about some important family matters, I said, keeping my voice slightly weaker than usual. I've been doing a lot of thinking since your father passed, and I realize there are things we need to discuss about the future. I could practically hear his mental gears grinding. Mom, are you okay? You sound different. I'm fine, dear. Just tired. But I think it's time we had a serious conversation about making sure everyone is taken care of properly. I paused for effect. I've been meeting with some people about my arrangements. The word arrangements hung in the air like a loaded gun. In estate planning, arrangements could mean anything from funeral planning to will changes, and I was counting on Marcus's lawyer brain to imagine the worst-case scenario. What kind of arrangements, Mom? We'll discuss it at dinner this weekend. Can you and Jessica come? I'll call Claire too. Within an hour of hanging up, my phone rang. It was Claire, clearly having been briefed by Marcus. Mom, Marcus said you wanted to talk about arrangements. Are you sick? Is something wrong? The panic in her voice was almost comical. For 5 years, she couldn't remember to call me on my birthday, but mention the word arrangements, and suddenly I was her top priority. I'm not sick, dear. I just think it's time we all had an honest conversation about family and what really matters. I let that sink in. I've been feeling very unappreciated lately, very taken for granted. There was silence on the other end. I could almost see Claire's face as she realized where this conversation was heading. Mom, we love you. You know that, right? Do I? I asked quietly and hung up. Within 24 hours, both of my children had suddenly remembered how to use their phones. The woman who'd been invisible for 5 years had somehow become the most important person in their world. Funny how the possibility of losing money can restore people's vision. Saturday evening arrived with the weight of a reckoning. I spent the afternoon preparing what I knew would be my last family dinner in this house. Not because I was dying, but because I was finally ready to start living. I made Marcus's favorite lasagna, Claire's preferred Caesar salad, and even picked up Jessica's gluten-free rolls from the expensive bakery across town. One final performance of the role I'd played for so many years. They arrived separately, but within minutes of each other, which told me they'd coordinated their approach. Marcus walked in carrying flowers. The first time he'd brought me flowers in 3 years. Claire had a card and a small wrapped gift. Jessica was clutching a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of forced smile that suggested she'd been coached on how to behave. Mom, you look wonderful, Claire said, hugging me a little too tightly. I brought you something for your birthday. I know we missed it, but better late than never, right? I accepted their offerings graciously, noting how their eyes kept darting around the room as if they were appraising the furniture. The anxiety was radiating off them in waves. Marcus kept checking his phone, and I could see him texting someone under the table during dinner, probably his lawyer friends, asking about guardianship procedures or competency evaluations. We made small talk through the meal. Forced conversation about Tommy's grades, Jessica's book club, Marcus's latest case. Nobody mentioned why we were really there until I finally set down my fork and looked at them directly. I asked you all here because I've been doing some serious thinking about my life and my legacy, I began, about what it means to be family. Marcus immediately went into lawyer mode. Mom, if this is about estate planning, you should know that any major decisions should be discussed with professional counsel. Sometimes grief can cloud judgment. And grief? I interrupted. Marcus, your father died 8 years ago. What I'm experiencing now isn't grief. It's clarity. I stood up and walked to the sideboard, where I'd placed a folder. Inside were printed copies of my bank statements, investment portfolios, and a timeline I'd created, documenting every forgotten birthday, missed call, and last-minute cancellation over the past 5 years. This is what I want to discuss, I said, spreading the papers on the table. I want to talk about respect, about appreciation, about the difference between loving someone and loving what they can do for you. Claire's face went pale as she scanned the timeline. Mom, you kept track of all this? When someone forgets your birthday 5 years in a row, you start to notice patterns, I said calmly. When someone only calls when they need money, you start to wonder about their motivations. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Mrs. Hartwell, families go through difficult periods. That doesn't mean what, Jessica? That you get to treat me like an ATM until I die, then fight over my corpse? My voice was steady, but my words cut through the room like glass. Because that's what this feels like. I've become a means to an end. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous, Mom. You're being manipulative and dramatic. We're busy people with lives and responsibilities. We can't drop everything every time you need attention. Every time I need attention, I repeated slowly. Marcus, I asked for one phone call, one acknowledgement that I exist, on my birthday, once a year. You're being unreasonable, Claire said, but her voice was shaking. We know you love us, but this guilt trip isn't fair. We're good children. We visit, we call, when you need something, I finished. Yes, you do. I walked back to my chair and sat down, looking at each of them in turn. I want you to know that I'm changing my will, all of it. The house, the investments, the savings account, you all seem to think belongs to you already. The room exploded. Marcus threatened legal action. Claire burst into tears. Jessica accused me of elder abuse and mental instability. But I sat perfectly still in the center of their storm, finally understanding what David had meant when he wrote that letter. Until they lost access to my wallet, they would never truly value me as a person. Dinner's over, I said quietly. Please let yourselves out. I have calls to make. The aftermath was swift and ugly. Within hours of my dinner announcement, my phone became a weapon of psychological warfare. Marcus left 3 voicemails, each one escalating from fake concern to barely concealed threats. Mom, I've been researching elder abuse protocols, his final message said. If someone is manipulating you, or if you're experiencing cognitive decline, there are legal protections in place. Claire tried a different approach, sending Tommy and Lily to my door the next morning with tears in their eyes and a handwritten note. Grandma, please don't be mad at Mom, Lily's note read. She cries every night now. She says, you don't love us anymore. Using my grandchildren as emotional hostages was a new low, even for Claire. But it was Jessica who revealed the family's true character. She posted on Facebook about my concerning behavior and started a whisper campaign among their friends about my mental state. Within days, people from our church were calling to check on me, clearly having been fed a story about my supposed dementia or depression. I drove to the coffee shop on Elm Street to escape the circus my house had become. That's where I met Sarah Chen. She was sitting alone at a corner table, grading papers with one hand while texting with the other, looking exhausted in the way only graduate students and overworked social workers can manage. When she dropped her stack of papers, I helped her collect them and noticed they were case files. Social work? I asked, sitting down across from her. Master's program, she said, with a tired smile. I work with elderly clients during the day, study at night. Not much time for anything else. We started talking, and I learned that Sarah spent her days visiting seniors who'd been abandoned by their families, helping them navigate Medicare, find affordable housing, connect with community resources. She mentioned working 2 jobs to pay for school while volunteering at the literacy program I'd seen at the library. The hardest part, Sarah said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, is watching how family members come out of the woodwork when there's an inheritance involved. I had a client last month whose daughter hadn't visited in 3 years, but showed up with a lawyer the day after he was diagnosed with dementia. As she spoke, I saw myself reflected in her stories. The forgotten birthdays, the financial manipulation, the sudden attention when wills were mentioned. But I also saw something else. A young woman who genuinely cared about elderly people, who saw them as individuals worth respecting, rather than resources to be depleted. I keep trying to start a nonprofit, Sarah continued. A community center where seniors can socialize, learn new skills, feel valued. But funding is impossible when you're working full-time just to survive. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. Mom, we need to talk. This has gone too far. We're coming over tonight, whether you like it or not. I looked at Sarah, then at my phone, and suddenly everything became clear. I wasn't just changing my will to punish my children. I was changing it to reward someone who embodied the values they'd forgotten. Respect for elders, genuine care, selfless service. Sarah, I said, how would you feel about having dinner with me tonight? I have a feeling my family is going to provide quite the entertainment. She looked confused, but nodded. Sure, Mrs. Hartwell. I'd like that. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Please, call me Elena, and trust me, this is going to be a night none of us will ever forget. I returned home at 6:30 to find Marcus's BMW and Claire's SUV already in my driveway. Through the window, I could see them pacing in my living room like caged animals. They'd let themselves in with the spare key I'd given them years ago for emergencies. Apparently, their inheritance being threatened qualified as a crisis. Sarah followed me up the front steps, clutching a bottle of wine and looking increasingly nervous. Are you sure about this, Elena? They seem pretty upset. Trust me, I said, opening the door. Sometimes people need to see exactly who they've become. The scene that greeted us was almost comical. Marcus was on his phone with someone, presumably another lawyer, while Jessica rifled through my mail on the side table. Claire was examining my prescription bottles, clearly building a case for my supposed mental instability. Mom! Claire rushed toward me with exaggerated relief. We were so worried when you didn't answer your phone. We brought dinner from that Italian place you love. How thoughtful, I said dryly. Marcus, please hang up. Jessica, step away from my personal mail. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sarah was young, Asian, and clearly not family, which meant she was a threat to their inheritance plans. Who is she? Marcus demanded, eyeing Sarah like she might be carrying legal documents. Sarah is a social worker and graduate student who spends her life caring for elderly people whose families have abandoned them, I said pleasantly. Sarah, these are my children, Marcus and Claire, and Marcus's wife, Jessica. You know, the ones I told you about. Sarah's eyes widened as understanding dawned. She'd heard this story from me just hours ago, but seeing it play out in real time was different. Mom, we need to talk, Claire said, shooting hostile glances at Sarah. Privately. Actually, Sarah is exactly who I want here for this conversation, I said, sitting down in David's chair. Because she understands something you three have forgotten, that elderly people are human beings worthy of respect, not just bank accounts with inconvenient personalities attached. I pulled out the folder of legal documents I'd prepared. I've finalized my new will. The house is going to the city to be converted into a community center for seniors. My investment portfolio is establishing the Sarah Chen Foundation for elder care. My savings will fund the literacy program at the library. What about us? Jessica blurted out, then immediately looked embarrassed. You? I smiled calmly. Marcus, I'm leaving you exactly $68,000. The amount I paid for your law school loans that you never repaid. Claire, You're getting $38,000, enough to cover the car payments I made for you and the medical bills I paid for Tommy. Consider it a refund." Marcus's face was purple with rage. "This is insane. You can't give our inheritance to some random stranger." "She's not a stranger," I said, looking at Sarah's stunned face. "She's someone who sees elderly people as valuable human beings instead of obstacles to wealth. She's what you used to be before you decided my bank account was more important than my birthday." Sarah was crying now, but they were tears of joy mixed with disbelief. "Elena, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not nearly enough," I said, "but it's a start." I stood up and walked to the door, opening it wide. "Marcus, Claire, Jessica, your 30 days to remove your belongings from my basement start tomorrow. After that, everything goes to Goodwill." As they filed out in stunned silence, Marcus turned back and last time. "You'll regret this, Mom. When you're old and alone, you'll remember that we're your real family." I looked at Sarah, who was already planning how to help other forgotten seniors, and then back at my son. "Marcus," I said gently, "I'm already old, and I was alone long before tonight. The difference is, now I'm old and alone by choice, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them." I closed the door and turned to Sarah. "Now, about that community center idea of yours. I think we have some planning to do." For the first time in 5 years, I felt like Elena Hartwell again. Not just somebody's mother, not just somebody's wallet, but a woman with the power to change lives, starting with her own.